Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Emily's list. I won't speak very long because we have such an amazing lineup of speakers. When I got the Rising Star Award in 2018, it was incredibly humbling. There's actually a picture of me receiving that award, like holding my heart, because it was right around my grandmother's birthday. And what I shared in receiving the award that evening is the fact that I've been able to assume this role coming from where I come from. My grandmother having migrated from the South, herself having not graduated from high school, my mother being a teenage mother who dropped out of high school right before I was born, and growing up in public housing here in Chicago, to assume this position was a testament to the women who came before me. And the fact of the matter is, someone who previously served as board chair of Planned Parenthood of Illinois, and running for this office and talking about my unapologetic support for abortion rights across the board, particularly for women of color. People said to me, why are you talking about abortion rights and running for state's attorney? Because I believe unequivocally that it has to be at the forefront of every elected office, no matter what. In the last 3 years, it has been quite a challenge in running this second largest prosecutor's office in the country in my hometown, and doing it wedded to the values that got me here in the first place. What got me here in the first place are those women who came before me, who scrapped and saved to do whatever they could to put me through law school, to put me through college, to put me on this path. And that's meant inheriting a criminal justice system in this city that had been inherently unfair to communities like mine. What most people didn't know, we have the largest single-site jail in the country. 86% of the people in that jail were black and brown. 86%. We have one of the largest juvenile temporary detention centers in the country. 92% of the kids who are there, black and brown. When we looked at the people who were in our jails, the women who were there, many of them defendants who had been sexually abused or assaulted. I talk openly about my sexual trauma because the reality is, but for the grace of God, there go I. And many of these women who were in our jails were there not because they were a threat to public safety, but because they were poor. Because here's the reality. Women will go and support men when they find themselves in trouble. But when women found themselves on the other side, they were often left alone. We had people in our jail not because they were keeping us up at night, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen. The fact is, we had a federal consent decree monitoring our jail for 4 decades. We had overcrowding so bad that in 1988, when I went to jail, or went to the jail on the Scared Straight program, it scared me straight to being a prosecutor. But the reality is that we had so many people who were there not because they were a threat, but because they were poor. And so we took on an issue like bail reform long before it became national conversation, to ensure that people who weren't a threat to the public were able to be out and be able to take care of their families while they awaited their day in court. Because what most people didn't know is that 70% of the people who were in our jails were there because they could not afford their bond, not because they were dangerous. And what they also didn't know was that there were dangerous people who had money, who could pay their way out of jail and go out and wreak havoc on our communities. We also looked at the fact that we had so many poor people in our jails, again, not a threat, but committing crimes of poverty. And again, it's deeply personal to me. Not that I excuse anyone for doing anything illegal, but we were prosecuting people for smoking marijuana. It's legal now. Yeah. John Boehner is like making money on a board of a marijuana company as we speak. And that's why it was important for me when I saw that. People ask me, what drove you to fight for marijuana legalization and reform? It literally was watching John Boehner talk about his change of heart and now his change of pocketbook. And so I sat there at the table when they were coming up with the legislation and said, before you sell a single brownie, joint, gummy, you better make it right for those communities who had been impacted by the war on drugs and vacate the convictions of everyone. We have a historic legislation here in Illinois that does that, and I pushed for that. We have people in our jails for committing low-level retail theft, and I need to tell you, because it's in the news a lot here, Illinois has one of the lowest thresholds for retail theft in the country. In the country. Our liberal neighbors in Indiana, their retail theft for a felony threshold is 2.5 times that of Illinois. Scott Walker country in Wisconsin, their threshold is $2,000. In Minnesota, I just met the lieutenant governor from Minnesota, their threshold for a felony is $1,000. You know what it is in Illinois? $300. In 2016, when I came into office, it was the bloodiest year in the city in almost 20 years. The bloodiest year. We had 760 plus people who were murdered just in Chicago. 4,000 people who were shot. Awful national news about our violence. And the young people who were dying, they reminded me of me. Because if you would have said to me, or my mother, that the first black woman to be elected to this role would come from Cabrini, no one would believe it. So every death in Lawndale, in Austin, in neighborhoods far flung remind me of mine. And yet when I looked at our resources in 2016, the #1 referred prosecution in our office wasn't guns. It wasn't shootings. It was retail theft. And so we used our discretion to say, how can we reallocate our resources, hold people accountable, and at the same time invest in violence strategies? And we created the Gun Crime Strategies Unit. We put our lawyers, who we were able to reallocate into neighborhoods plagued by violence. And we saw a decrease in violence in those neighborhoods that surpassed those in neighborhoods that didn't have them. And that's because in this work, I realized that we have to do things differently with the knowledge that my mother and my grandmother showed to me. That sometimes you got to put your neck out there and try things differently and take the bruises that come with it. You may not know this. I've been bruised a lot. But I'm so humbled by the people who've come before me. That I recognize that as our city and gun violence has gone down year over year for the last 3 years, as we've been able to become a national model, there's not a presidential Democratic nominee that doesn't have a criminal justice platform that they're running on. And every single one of them have a platform that is built on what we've done here. It's why we've been able to get endorsements from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and more to come. Because of what we've done. They don't get involved in local prosecutors' races. It's because we've become the model of what's possible for justice reform when we lead with our values. And so I'm grateful for Emily's List for their belief and support of me. 2 years ago when they bestowed the Rising Star Award on me, there is no greater pressure than getting an award that Stacey Abrams got or Ayanna Pressley got, who I now count as friends, who I text with to give me support during the bruising times. Emily's List and your investment in their work to make sure that it is open and available to diverse candidates with diverse experiences. It's not just that I'm an African American woman, it's that I'm a woman from the projects whose parents didn't know what was possible and available to me, to be able to lead with that, with the belief of an organization with the strength of Emily's List, why I will go anywhere and do anything for this organization because of what they've done for me. And so I thank you all for your continued support of women candidates who are unapologetic and unabashed in their support for abortion rights, because that's where I stand, that's who I am. And for making sure that we are represented not just at the margins, but at the forefront of reform in this country. Thank you so very, very much. I mean, who's feeling inspired? I'm feeling inspired. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Kim, and we are with you all the way. Oh, look at that. The next speaker we have is going to take that same kind of passion to a different office. Teresa Greenfield is running to